I'd like to call to order this meeting of the Santa Barbara Airport Commission for October 16th? 16th of this year. Thank you very much. Roll call.
Good evening, Commissioners. Commissioner Khan,
Present.
Commissioner Hopkins,
Present.
Commissioner Wilson, Commissioner Bowen, Commissioner Houghton,
Here.
Commissioner Goodman,
Here.
and we have a quorum.
Thank you. Are there any changes to the agenda?
No changes to the agenda.
No changes to the agenda. Then the notice that on Thursday, October 10th, 2019 at 5 p.m., the Airport Commission Secretary duly posted this agenda on the bulletin board at the Airport Administration. The next item on our agenda is public comment. Any member of the public may address the Airport Commission on any subject within the jurisdiction of the Commission that is not scheduled before them that same day. Total amount of time 15 minutes, no individual more than 3 minutes. We have two speakers. Our first speaker is Francisco on noise abatement.
Airport Administration. My name is Francisco Chacon. I'm here to address the issue of noise abatement. One of the things I want to address is this issue of noise abatement gets 3,500 calls in 7 months. Okay, that's 3,500 calls. There hasn't been anything put on the agenda on noise abatement. The progress, the not progress, is there less calls this month or not? That's an issue. We got to be compatible. If our airport is not compatible with the community around it, something has to change. And we as public servants need to address that. And I'm just hoping that we do a little bit more to become aware of noise abatement. I can see that there are some people starting to come in over the mesa in the open area and do the approach that way. But they're not vectored in the right direction over that area. So they're coming over the neighborhood still. I've even seen airlines come over the mesa in Santa Barbara and turn over west side Santa Barbara. And that's totally out there. I go, not necessary in my mind. I mean, I never called before a year ago. I've lived in that area for 25 years. I never had this many jets flying over, privates and commercial. Something has to be done to make it compatible with the neighborhood and the land use around the airport. We need to be good neighbors. Thank you.
Thank you. The second speaker is Dr. Espinoza.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'd like to connect the conversation about noise with health issues. In a study, a 2015 study in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health, Steinfeld states that air pollution is a primary environmental stressor in relation to cardiovascular morbidity and mortality. In an article in the by Walker in 2015 entitled Airports, Air Pollution, and Contemporary Health Issues, also links daily exposure to aircraft emissions as a health-related issue, in addition to annoyance of noise. In the FAA's 2015 Aviation Environmental they state that their guiding principle is to, and I quote, limiting and reducing future aviation environmental impacts to levels to protect public health and welfare. When a jet flies over, if an aircraft flies over and you can hear it, you're being doused with a plume of aircraft emission. There are studies, even in this same report by the FAA, outlining the fact that those emissions are carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, sodium oxides, black carbon. So it's more than just annoying noise. These pollutants are coming into the air, and anybody that has children, has a pulmonary problem, is being impacted by this. That's why, as the FAA states, we need to minimize this as much as possible. The airport needs tools to be able to do that. And one of the things that Supervisor Hart found in his fact-finding thing, work, was that there was plans. He reported out on the status of our sound monitoring systems. And if I read the report correctly, it sounded like the 3 monitors that do exist are no longer operational, and that there's a schedule for them to be upgraded. And then I go back to the 2006 FAA report, that record of approval for Santa Barbara Airport noise compatibility program dated 2006, in which the airport said they would install 5 monitors to monitor noise, and the FAA approved. My question is, where are the 5 monitors? When will they all become operational? Because if we know more about what the noise is being created, we can understand what the contours of the emissions are also. So I'm requesting that for the monitors be made public. Secondly, I want to thank you all and request that we be updated monthly on the airport request, different agencies, that they publish our nav GPS approach to include voluntary visual approach on runway 25, to give the tools to our pilots to be able to use the recommended path that we would really like to see them use, i.e. to go over, as Frank said, to go over more Mesa and stay away from populated areas. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Director, I believe that you are going to have a report, though I know you have done a lot of work on noise abatement, at a future meeting, is that correct?
Chairman Hopkins, yes, sir. We do have a community meeting planned. We don't have a date set for it yet, but it will be coming up soon.
Thank you, because I make that note because I know that the airport, in fact, has been doing a great deal of work on this this item. Liaison reports. Are either of our liaisons here? I don't see them, so we will have to skip item 3 and go to item 4, which is the director's report.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you all for attending the first Airport Commission retreat last week. This was a very productive retreat where I believe we shared perspectives and discussed a lot of information that was designed for us to align our objectives and function better as a cohesive unit. I hope to build upon what we learned and plan another such event in the future. Civil Air Patrol has vacated the airport administrative offices and have relocated to the spaces negotiated with them. Staff continues to work with Civil Air Patrol on relocation of the antennas used in their operation. The administrative offices that they formerly occupied will now be refurbished and converted into airport police and staff offices. On today's agenda, we have a presentation for you on airport-controlled transient parking. Staff did exactly what we were asked to do, and that is to study airport-controlled transient parking at Santa Barbara Airport. The feasibility of this program was looked at objectively, creatively, and responsibly. While some may not like the results of the study, it is done with the airport's best interest in mind, and any motives to undermine the good work of staff or to drive this body towards making a bad decision, with all due respect, is simply irresponsible. The presentation and recommendation will speak for itself, and we are happy to answer any questions after that presentation. And I think we have a staff report on certification and operations.
That's correct. Good evening. After much long work and negotiations with our transportation network carriers, I'm very happy to report as of October 1, we have now executed and are collecting trip revenues for the Ubers and Lyfts that are operating in and around the facility, which has been the first kickoff ground transportation program that has been much long awaited by staff and commission. So we're going to be monitoring, but as it stands today at this point, projections are coming in at higher than anticipated and higher than budgeted. So it's very favorable for the airport and for the community to see that the transportation network companies have really taken off. We had hoped that they would, in addition to all of our other ground transportation service providers, which are routinely taking trips down to LA as airline needs dictate. So with that, that concludes my report. Thank you.
And that also concludes the director's report.
Do any of the committee have any questions concerning any of those comments?
No.
I have one for Mr. Keller. The transportation network plan went through multiple stages. There was going to be staff, there were going to be transponders, then there wasn't staff, there wasn't transponders. Amount on the budget was up and down, and the amount on the expenses were up. Could you give us a 2-minute what we finally ended up with?
I'd be happy to. So as it stands right now for our on-demand and our per-trip operators, we have not invested in the infrastructure as we do not believe it's necessary at this time. We're going to start a spot audit, which from our consultant that is also working on the FBO development. Our relationship with them has garnered some advice on how to perform that without the need for the infrastructure that was originally slated for purchase. And then on the staffing side, it essentially has equated to additional part-time airport security aid to assist with the ground transportation efforts out on the curb front. So it's a very minimal expense at 20 hours a week for that person. And all in all, it will definitely help with infrastructure improvements into the future. We can divert some of that money to help pay for the needs out in the commercial ground transportation lane. So one additional part-time body, and then it will be a 3% of all revenues that go to the ground transportation monitor, so to speak, for AAAE that will be monitoring that and then feed us back the data that we need to report out for our P3 objectives.
And so the total revenue we expect is approximately?
I would have to defer to Tom Bowlers on that, but I would say it's in the ballpark range of $250,000 or so.
Great. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Chairman, question.
Yes.
How is it that you compute or account for the various network transportation companies for each of their trips?
So through the AAAE, the American Association of Airport Executives, they have an app-based transportation app. What they do is they leverage technology to establish geofences around the terminal facility, which is where those pickup fees are collected. And then we also have a staging area that's been designated at 495 South Fairview. That is where the Ubers and Lyfts will be staging to reduce traffic congestion on the roadways. And then once a passenger calls for transportation, then that will automatically dispatch the first Uber or Lyft that was in that staging area to the terminal, and then for the pickup, and then subsequently thereforth. Previously, as you may know, all of our TNCs were continuously circling around the terminal drive, as the practice is the closest to the requested pickup receives the fare, and this absolves that, and then therefore can reduce traffic congestion on the roadway as well.
And they have agreed to this?
They have agreed to it, and I actually took a telephone call from Lyft specifically this morning, and they're reporting very positive feedback and results of the operation. I haven't spoken with Uber in some time, but they are very pleased with the operation here.
Thank you.
Welcome.
And if I understood right, we are getting a percentage of their, what the person pays for the trip?
That's correct. It's a $2.75 fee, and of that, the airport retains 97% of that, and then the American Association of Airport Executives retains the remaining 3% for the purpose of providing the software and the engineering that continues to take
So
place.
the airport gets most of the 275, whether the trip is across the street or LA.
It is
Right,
a flat
okay.
275. That is correct, Commissioner.
Okay, great. Any other questions developed from there? Director's report. Next item, the consent calendar. We used to have that in the earlier stages, threw me off here. The consent calendar, we have two recommendations here: that the Airport Commission waive the reading and approve the minutes of the Commission meeting of Wednesday, September 25th, and that the airport receive the monthly airport property management report. Do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So move.
Seconded.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? That takes care of the consent calendar, both approved. The next and last item is the airport controlled transient parking. Recommendation of the Airport Commission accept the study prepared by staff regarding airport transient parking, including identified risks and vulnerabilities evaluated by airport staff with city risk management and legal department. Staff's recommendation includes continued pursuit for solutions to ensure access for transient general aviation through other available means.
Good evening again, Commissioners. So as requested in the August 2019 Airport Commission meeting, staff was asked to, step back here. Staff was asked to complete a study of the potential implementation of an airport-controlled transient parking apron. Just to kind of lay this out generically before we get into the details, airport-controlled transient parking, for the intent of this discussion, really focuses transient pilots who are not from the Santa Barbara area, who will be visiting and maybe looking for a place to tie down their aircraft. So that's the transient part of it. And we're just looking at designating an area on the airport in this study for the purpose of that parking arrangement. Commissioner Hopkins specifically made a motion which was passed by the full commission, so therefore we have completed the study. And a written concept of his vision specifically of the airport controlled transient parking was also included as part of that request. So we fully understand the objective of this program and the need to improve access for our transient general aviation operators into Santa Barbara, and staff supports this objective. Kind of getting into the history a little bit, if you take a look back to approximately 2017, and I would venture to say probably a little bit before, the Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, commonly referred to as AOPA and referred to as AOPA hereafter in this presentation, launched an effort to reduce the cost of flying into facilities around the nation in order to support transient general aviation access. In lieu of infrastructure changes, AOPA has encouraged airport operators to work with their FBOs in order to negotiate favorable contracts that preserve alternative access improvements. This, as we saw across the nation, from the AOPA perspective, was that the fixed base operators out and about throughout the nation were charging fees that were higher than desired for transient operators flying into facilities and general operators in general who didn't want the full service FBO experience. So that's really what prompted AOPA's involvement in this matter. We are happy to report that here in Santa Barbara, our FBOs have been very good partners and do provide quality service and access for our general aviation aircraft at a reasonable cost. We've studied, we've reached out, and to try to understand a little bit more about what each operator currently provides here. So under Commissioner Hopkins' proposal for the Airport Controlled Transient Parking Initiative to increase access for general aviation, that was truly the goal. The proposal suggested designating a portion of the airfield for transient aircraft parking, and that area would be managed by the airport staff. Designated transient parking would permit any transient pilot throughout the nation, and in theory, any pilot from throughout the world, customs at another facility, to taxi into a designated parking area and park their aircraft. It's simply just a tie-down area for those aircraft. So, in theory, the proposal, the pilots would be permitted to exit the airfield and return as needed for the purpose of takeoff. And it is expected that the airport would provide the pilot and any of their requested guests access to property, as they would likely be flying in with maybe it's perhaps family members, friends, things of that nature. And that the landing and access to that to the facility would be at a low cost in order to avoid services of either FBO, the so-called red carpet treatment. So, kind of rewinding a little bit back to the airport master plan, which was adopted by City Council in 2017. To speak a little bit about what a master plan is and exactly what it is, or is that exactly as I said, it is a plan. It's a facility planning study that sets forth the conceptual framework for possible future airport developments. It really forces us as the airport operator to get out ahead, more specifically with our airport improvement program grant funding, to make sure that we're looking at this in a logical manner, plan for how to spend that money. As such, the airport master plan was included as one of those, the transient parking was included in the airport master plan as one of those items. The specific site identified was located due west of runway 15 right as a placeholder for airport-controlled transient parking in the master plan documents. However, it's important to note that no formal study was completed at the time, as it was truly just a conceptual idea for study at a later date, and here we are taking a closer look at that as timing comes nearer to where that fell into our master plan. But it is important to note that the implementation of any master plan project, whether it be now or on the 20-year horizon, which is what the extent of the master plan is, must make sound business sense at the time not only it's placed into the master plan, but at the time of completion and actual construction and or implementation of that program. And as you'll see here, if you refer to Exhibit 6D within the airport master plan, it lays out the entire proposed site. I will make note that within the document provided by Commissioner Hopkins, it doesn't encompass the full area shown is essentially from Hangar 1, which is building 317 right here, and it goes all the way over to this hangar right here. So it's essentially a shrunken down area, but it truly focuses on the center area through here, where the current flight school operates, and where we have additional tie downs that are leased by Signature Aviation. Alternatively, within Commissioner Hopkins' proposal, it was noted that if the site west of runway 15 right is not a viable alternative, that this is another proposed alternative that should be considered. Currently, this is the city T hangar tie downs, and additionally, Above All Maintenance has some tie downs in the area. And additionally, to support this proposal, we would have to shift the airport tie downs over to the other previously identified transient parking on the west side of runway 15 right, because clearly we have a need to accommodate city tie down tenants. So to start off, we did a quick survey of other transportation security regulated 1542 regulated Class Charlie airports. We did not find any that currently parking arrangement. One specific facility, as it is the trend nationwide, they are moving away from the airport controlled practice, and they're transitioning to FBO controlled parking for the purposes of security and the staffing function, which the FBOs are currently handle, and they do handle currently on their own aprons. So security posture for us as a TSR Part 1542 regulated facility is of utmost importance. It lays out very strict security requirements as provided by the SA. Additionally, any new programs that the airport does take on must address all security implications and mitigate all potential security vulnerabilities to the fullest extent practical. This is how how TSA comes to approve our program. They take a look at vulnerabilities, assess the vulnerabilities, and if they find that the vulnerabilities can be overcome, then they may approve the airport security program, which is where the details of the security arrangements would be maintained. So some improvements have already taken place here. Kind of one of the AOPA's recommendations was to work with the FBOs so that we could ensure that the operation could be handled without adverse effect. One significant solution that is currently in place at both FBOs here in Santa Barbara is the waiver of all handling and parking fees when purchasing certain quantities of fuel. And this is just to kind of speak a little bit more specifically to this. This is for the day parking fees. So you can come in, buy a certain quantity of fuel, they will waive your handling fee, and essentially your output to the FBO would be for the purchase of fuel. And when we take a look at what it takes specifically for one of those fee waivers to take place, I took a look at the comparison of the average 100 low lead, and since we're talking about small piston aircraft, the fuel in the southwestern region of the United States. And I compared that to the Santa Barbara self-serve pricing that currently exists. Some sample fees, so on average, as of October 14th, the average fuel price for 100 low lead in the southwest region is $4.69 per gallon. Look at the Santa Barbara prices, you'll notice they're a little bit higher, but we currently see that not only in the aviation market, but we see that in the auto market as well, the price difference between here and Ventura, for example. So I want to just point out real quick that if you take a look at the additional fuel cost over the average that you would pay, so if the additional fuel cost in Santa Barbara over the average, in essence, to make that minimum purchase, you would expend about $2.80, which could alleviate the entire handling and parking fee for the visit into Santa Barbara. So when we start to take a look at the findings, it's important to point out a few different items here. There is significant liability exposure, there are security concerns, and there are negative financial implications that the airport would realize, as this is a business that is currently being handled by our fixed-based operators for a relatively low cost. And it's important to say that our findings also cannot be mitigated with the existing staffing level. This would require an increase to staff. It will affect the finances, and the technology itself is also not exactly what I would refer to as providing the level of security that I believe and our risk management and legal team believe will provide us with the adequate staffing. So exposure versus benefit. I think it's important to look at what we already have and the exposure that we would be providing to the city and to the airport and to our users and tenants should we go down this path. So first off, the benefit. The benefit's already being realized by the transient customers flying into Santa Barbara. As mentioned, you could come in and spend an additional $2.80 over average, and you could park for the entire day. Aircraft are underneath the umbrella of the fixed-based operators insurance when using their facilities, which is a great advantage that the city of Santa Barbara has, in that we have partners on the airfield who have their own insurance policies to cover some of the significant liability that exists. And I will say that, I think I already mentioned this, at least one of the airports surveyed indicated that they were transitioning back to FBO-controlled parking, and that was just one of the reasons that they had mentioned. It wasn't in the airport's best interest anymore when they had fixed-based operators on the airfield that were willing, ready, and capable to provide this inexpensive service. So, in speaking with our risk management department, I was able to pull some of the existing data that we require for all aircraft operators that are parked on the airport. So if you're going to park airplane on the airport, you're required to have at least a $1 million insurance policy to cover against any and all damage that may occur. So it's really good as it also indemnifies the city of Santa Barbara because we are also named as a separately insured party on all insurance documents. So it truly provides us with that insurance that if something were to happen, we're covered as well. And then any additional liability would present itself to the city and could increase future insurance rate. And what I mean by that is, should there be an incident in the proposed transient parking area, the city would have to absorb all of that cost into what we pay for our allocated cost to risk management. And should there be an incident, that does affect our insurance premiums and will so for the additional 5 years beyond when that incident occurs. So now focusing a little bit on the security, the TSA provides airport operators with a tool that they call a vulnerability assessment. This assessment is to take place on many new security programs just to ensure that what we're doing does meet the level of security protocols that are expected by TSA and expected by our tenants. So they have a checklist of items related to best practices that we can use. And as we studied those checklists, it did reveal that this does present a level of exposure that we believe to be unacceptable to the city of Santa Barbara and the tenants on airport. And I will say, experience does show that the threat is real. It manifests itself in the insider threats, in the outsider threats, and it's not unheard of for a pilot, for example, to fly into an area of the airport with ill intent. Quite frankly, as we saw during 9/11, those were individuals who would have the same authority to fly into Santa Barbara and cause harm should they choose. Additionally, you look at security exposure. These are unknown, unbadged individuals who will be granted unescorted access to the airfield. They are not familiar with the airport's security protocols, which we focus very heavily on all fronts, because that's where we find the violations are typically occurring. Folks that are not as educated as they should be with this current security practices here. And unfortunately, we wouldn't have the opportunity to work with this aviation community that are flying in from away to provide them with the training because they do not have airport badges. So therefore, the problem comes with our current notice of violation program, which is the tool that we use to enforce security on all badge holders on the airport. And if they do not have a badge, no enforcement mechanism to hold them accountable for any security-related infractions, which is a problem for us. And speaking a little bit about the additional exposure, I'd like to touch on TSA's view on airport security. TSA, just like the FAA, they put the responsibility for airfield security in the case of TSA or safety in the case of the FAA solely on the airport operator. They aren't going to tell us how to do our job. Rather, they are going to approve a proposal that we have and tell us whether or not that meets current regulatory requirements. So I would say then additionally, if there are requirements that the airport operator is not able to maintain, then they mandate compliance improvements. So should vulnerabilities come out in the future after a potential implementation of this, the TSA will then hold the airport accountable via civil penalties and fines for non-compliance and then mandate future compliance improvements should there be security infractions within that area. And just, again, looking at the threats as a whole, not getting into the details, but just knowing that this proposal opens a loophole in our current security practices and does expose the airport to many different threats. Again, I kind of spoke to a few of them, the insider threat, things of that nature. So implications on the airport specific to the financial obligations. So looking at managing GA operations, that is a legitimate professional business of FBOs across the nation, and they perform it well across the nation. Under this proposal, the airport is attempting to provide a service which is already being adequately provided by our FBOs. So again, we ask ourselves the risk versus reward. And additionally, as I noted, the airport would need to hire additional staff to handle this arrangement properly, which would result in increased user fees for any transient access, because that would have to offset any of the fees. The fees would have to offset the expense to the airport, both on the infrastructure and staffing side. So staff recommendations. Concerns for access for transient GA aircraft can be accommodated without unnecessary risk and exposure to the airport, as is being done today. In speaking with other professionals who have worked on some of the standards for access control system, there was a document, DO 230J, that recently is or will be published very soon. And forgive me for not recalling the acronym, RTCA, and I can't think of what it is, but it is an aviation group right now. And they were originally looking at providing airports with tools for trying to accommodate this type of arrangement. In speaking with the secretary of the board, they've advised that the focus is now shifted, that is not something that they believe that they should be focusing on pushing on a TSR Part 1542 regulated facility, and that they're going to be looking more for the real threats that are out there, and probably perhaps a little bit more imminent, and I'm sure you've heard about them in the news, specifically the unmanned air systems that have been causing havoc both internationally and then within our nation as well. So they're going to start to take a closer look at that, and that's where they believe that their board's focus should be. So again, the feedback that I received was that staff concurrence of the RTCA's direction, they are hopeful that airports are able to work through new agreements, new contracts, and specifically any means to work directly with our fixed-based operators to provide reasonable, cost-effective transient aircraft access. So therefore, we do advise that continued FBO handling of the transient aircraft parking is the appropriate action and in the best interest of the airport. And again, this is not just a discussion that took place here on airport. This is a conversation that took place throughout the city and is in full support from our risk management department and our city attorney's office. So I want to share that with you as well. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer at this time.
I have a question.
Sure.
There's a concept in the international flying and global.
Excuse me, we need to, at some point, open it up for public comment, which we will be doing momentarily. Do we wish to have comments first, or maybe we should hear the public comment before the commissioners speak? So if that's okay with the other commissioners?
I was actually thinking we should get business done first and then open it to the public.
Okay,
If I may continue.
yes, please.
First off, my experience with other pilots has been that our two existing FBOs have been doing a fine job, and they're very pleased with the fuel purchase deal. So there's always grumbling about security, of course, but there's nothing we can do about what TSA puts on us. My only concern might be in the future, after we relocate FBOs and change everything, to make sure that this issue of making Santa Barbara accessible by all pilots, that we remember this issue when we have potentially new FBOs in new facilities. But currently, to me, it doesn't seem to be a problem at this time. So I just wanted to say thanks to our two FBOs that seem to be doing a good job so far.
Yes?
I'd like to add that I think also the two FBOs are doing a good job, but we haven't discussed the issue of what happens when someone shows up, wants to pick up somebody and leave, doesn't want any parking services, doesn't want any fueling services. At that point, what is the situation, and is it anywhere noted that there is a charge? Is the charge regulated? Who collects it? So I guess my question is, how does that work, or how do they collect? Is it collectible? Is there a charge for, if you have two engines, you stop one engine and you let somebody out, and that's all you wanted to do? I mean, are we basically trying to charge for using the pavement on the runways? And if so, that's, needs to be stated.
So I will answer the question. We have landing fees that are separate from the FBO collected fees that you're referring to. And our small aircraft under 10,000 pounds are exempt from those landing fees. So that is not the intent, is to offset any type of landing fee. What I will say is that the FBOs are providing a service for those who are coming in to, say, pick up a passenger. And we aren't going to ask the FBO to provide a service for free. So therefore, if you are doing business with the FBO, the small quantity purchase of fuel is a way to offset that fee which you're referring to.
I'm actually referring to somebody who isn't going to go see the FBO, isn't going to stop at the FBO. You know, for example, there are times when somebody brings me home from having left my airplane somewhere. They don't need any fuel. If they do, I have them go down to the self-fueling. But if they just drop me off and leave, they haven't used the facility. I guess the question is, what is the...
Well, again, I would say that that activity is appropriate for the FBO rather than some separate parking area that, again, the city would be exposed. And so the FBO is the appropriate place to do that. We can do some follow-up and find out what the FBOs charge for that type of service, but most definitely they should be going to the FBO.
Thank you.
I have a large number of comments, but I actually, it might be better for me to hold my comments until after we've heard from the public. If there are any speakers, we can open public comment at this time. Anybody who wishes to speak, please fill out a speaker slip and come up to the mic. We have anybody who's interested in speaking? Okay, then I guess we will close public comment. I have a letter here from the AOPA that I believe the airport has received. It's 2 pages long, so I don't know that I need to read the entire thing. But some aspect of it is that Henry Thompson states in his letter to Commission, consistent with AOPA encouragement, my staff believes concerns for the access for transient general aviation can be accommodated without unnecessary risk exposure to the airport, and that this business legitimately belongs to the FBOs who are better positioned to manage it and mitigate these risks. This, by the way, is from Melissa McCarthy, who's a Western Regional Manager of AOPA. I want to take this moment to clarify that AOPA does not believe this authority should be left of commercial FBOs. We believe the City of Santa Barbara, we encourage the City of Santa Barbara to address the concerns of its pilots community who have voiced several legitimate options for sponsor, meaning airport control transient parking. But the major thing I would like to say here is this was a 20-some page presentation, which I first saw when we sat down here at this. Prior to this, all the community, all AOPA, all anybody knew was basically, to make it simple, the answer is no. And there are a number of items in this report which I question. Some I disagree with, others I would like to see the data to back them up. I believe that Santa Maria and San Luis Obispo are both airports with TSA control in a fashion similar to ours. Both of them have what I'm discussing, and I'd also like to point out that all of the discussion has been for day use, but many pilots spend more than a day here, and the fees go from $280 to $50 to $100 a day, depending on the type of aircraft. We're still talking about small aircraft. So there's a lot that I would suggest should be considered and discussed probably offline. Reading from this letter.
Excuse me, Commissioner
Yes.
Hopkins. You said you had a lot of questions. I'm not quite sure your comments and your questions are. If you're expecting a response, we need to understand what you would like us to respond to.
Thank you, I will. So, continuing with this letter, lastly, any proposed changes at a public airport must incorporate feedback from the public. As a proposed plan from the airport director has not been publicly released until today, AOPA and its members are unable to provide appropriate comments prior to the October 16th meeting. AOPA looks forward to being able to review the proposed plan, provide comments as is standard with any proposed plans. We respectfully request that the proposed plan, including sponsor-controlled transient GA parking, or that the commission at least defer the adoption of the plan until transient GA parking can be more thoroughly evaluated. So that's that letter, and my request to the commission and the airport would be to bring this item back at next month's meeting, which would give both the local community as well as AOPA and other organizations an opportunity to review this very thorough and I'd say well done document. Obviously staff spent time on it, but that doesn't mean that everybody agrees with everything that was in the document. And not having had it, we have no real opportunity to review it, think about it, comment on it, bring out exceptions, unless we spend a great deal of time here. So that would be what I'd like to see the commission do with this report. Just request that it notice it, no action be taken now, come back 1 month from now. We wouldn't necessarily have to go through the whole thing if it was published or posted so that people could read it, and then the commission could make its decision. Yes.
I would also point out that this has not been to the GA subcommittee for review or their input or suggestion as to how to mitigate or answer some of the issues, because I think a lot of the issues are answered and they are doing fine. I think there are a very few that are tough to deal with because they don't happen a lot, but when they do, they seem to have egregious fees associated with them. And either those need to be posted and clearly stated as to the fact that that is what is happening, because I think rather than not telling them is doing any of us a service. So I'd like to see it go to the GA subcommittee for review.
That might be a way to have that longer open discussion outside of this meeting, because there's a lot of discussion that could be had, and I don't think this is the appropriate forum.
So I'd like to comment to a host of things that were said there. I'll start off by saying the letter which you have in your possession from AOPA is somewhat disturbing because airport staff has not seen or received that letter. And if you submitted draft information that we provided to you last week to AOPA, and AOPA responded directly to you because we have not seen the letter you have. And I would expect that if they wrote a letter and they sent that letter off, you received that letter, that the airport staff should have received that letter as well. And we would be able to respond to you concerning that letter. That letter does not change the findings of this study. Just want to be clear about that.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I received the email. I could have sworn that your name was on that same email. It says here, transmitted via electronic mail to airport@santabarbaraca.gov. So I don't know whether it came in that way or it came to you, but I know that I was told that a copy of this was sent to you. I received this 3-4 hours ago.
Well, again, in your communications to AOPA, and I check my email constantly throughout the day, in your communication with AOPA, they may have communicated to you that it was transmitted to the airport. It was not received by the airport staff. So it's very troubling that you would present that letter in this forum today when we have no knowledge of it. Again, it does not change the airport's position on the study that we've presented to you. And in respect to the study, We were not asked to bring this to a subcommittee, nor is it necessary or required to take this before a subcommittee. A subcommittee meeting to discuss this very presentation that we're presenting to you before the entire commission today would not be productive, or the best use of our time. However, if you collectively, are requesting us to do that, we'll do that, but it does not change the results of the study that staff was requested to make on this issue. And in respect to your comment about staff returning and simply no, that is not what our recommendation says. Staff at the very beginning of this presentation acknowledges your concern to have adequate and affordable and reasonable parking for transient aircraft that come into this airport. And we agreed we would work on that, and we provided you with a solution which is currently in place now that would address that issue. So to correct, the statement that you made that we came back to you and simply said no, that is not what we said. We said your proposal doesn't work. However, we suggest handling your concern in another way. So I just want to be clear about that. In respect to San Luis Obispo Airport, which you cited as an example, of a similar airport that offers this service, this was something that the airport inherited down there due to the structure of their lease agreements, and they're moving away from this model. So to cite them as an example, yes, they had been doing it. Today they have FBOs handling all transient aircraft that come into that airport. So the airport has the ramp available, but ACI is the FBO and handles those aircraft. And I can say to you, I was up there visiting with the airport director 2 weeks ago, and I observed this myself. So regardless of what other airports are doing, the airport here in Santa Barbara, we've looked at it very creatively, and it is not feasible to do it here in Santa Barbara based upon the assessment of professional staff here at the airport and in consultation with our risk management department in the city and our city attorney's office. So we can study this all you want, but the conclusion remains the same. We cannot mitigate the items that we have presented to this body.
I would still request either a GA subcommittee followed by coming back in next month, or we could come back next month and I and maybe others would take this discussion offline with you and Mr. Keller or whomever else you find necessary. But as discussed at our retreat, this is a business meeting. End up with a long and lengthy set of questions back and forth. And otherwise, that's what I'm going to have to do because I have a whole lot of questions concerning this. I would also like to point out, if I had known that you had not received this letter, I would have given a copy of it as soon as I walked in. I was
Probably should
certainly under the impression that you had received it, and I will go back and take a look at what happened and why you didn't get it. And I don't know whether airport at is a valid address, but I'll certainly give you this copy right now, or as soon as I'm. So it depends on what the commission would like to do. We could bring it back to the commission for any additional discussion or comments.
Well, since you guys were looking down in my direction, I guess I'll grab the mic first. I think as much as I like the easier transient park availability, and I've spent a lot of time trying to figure a way to make it work, I think the TSA requirements are like a poison pill. And without having somebody staffing it, do we throw in a third FBO that's a low-cost operator? I don't know. But I see a unstaffed location working with the TSA requirements. And as I've often stated, we don't get to argue with the TSA. They just do unto us. So my concerns are that without resolving the security issue, we don't have a chance, even though I am. a better, easier, cheaper transient parking solution. Sorry.
That's okay. If we had further discussion, I would go into at great length the number of airports that AOPA has worked with for unstaffed that meet requirements. That has been done at a number of airports. But again, not having seen this, not knowing what research was done, I can't present you with that list. But I'd say monthly, there's an article in AOPA about another airport that has implemented unstaffed transient access to and from the airport. But we're trying not to have long discussions here.
And Commissioner Hopkins, I'm more than happy to meet with you and to address the questions that you have remaining. We're confident with the level of review that we've provided here, the study that we've presented to you, and the recommendation that we're making to you.
Commissioner Khan, any comments?
My comments are having a little further elucidation of what is involved in the non-standard situations, because I can certainly understand the need for the security and the fact that CEOs do a fine job as it is in the standard cases, but I guess I would like to hear the details on when it's not standard and what are the procedures that they are going to adhere to, so we have some notion. I was going to ask if Matt from Signature was in the audience.
He's not here tonight.
Don't think he is, so that I think that would be helpful. And let's see, there are only... Yes. Brianna, can you tell us what your position is for somebody who merely needs to drop off, let's say, one of your tenants and leave, need fuel? What is the situation for them?
Ma'am, if you're going to respond, could you come up to the podium?
Please state your name.
Brianne Whitney, General Manager at Atlantic. Karen, to answer your question, if someone were to come and drop off at our facility, we do charge a drop-off fee of $15. It's 30 minutes or less. If they're there, it can be waived with either 15 gallons or a top-off. So even if that top-off is 2 gallons, it'll waive your fee.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I guess my is how to mitigate the liability to the airport. I don't see any reason to not go through the FBOs unless you can find a reasonable insurance cost to the airport. So that would be my issue. If there is a way around that, then I'm certainly to looking at not having to go to the FBOs. But if they bear the brunt by being here already and they have insurance for everyone in the airport isn't involved, to me, that's my issue.
Okay, so I'm interested in always cutting red tape and improving efficiency of operations. And I look at this as a liability issue. And boy, heaven forbid if something went wrong once we started this. I don't like the idea of the consequences to the city, so I think the staff has done a good job with this review, and I would maintain that we keep things status quo.
Okay, this is a recommendation that they accept this report. So I need a motion to accept the report.
I move that we accept the report from staff.
Third.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstain? I will abstain.
I'll abstain as well.
So at that, we are adjourned.